If you haven't heard of differentiation of self, this is exactly why you need to know about it. My name is Oliver and I'm a family systems therapist, and this is so important, I teach all of my clients about it. This is a fully differentiated person. They can separate out their thoughts, feelings, self, and other. That means that they can have thoughts about their feelings and feelings about their thoughts, and as a result, they respond to life based on all the information they can get. There's nice, healthy boundaries between self and other, and that means that their relationships tend to be rich and satisfying. And this is an undifferentiated person. Their thoughts, feelings, self, and other are a hot mess. Because thoughts and feelings are not separated, they tend to react to life rather than respond. And the boundaries between self and other are blurry, which means their relationships tend to be complicated. And this is chronic anxiety. Now, we all have some amount of chronic anxiety, but the more of it that you have, the more of it that you can carry, the more likely you are to show symptoms in your relationships or yourself. So which one would you rather be? If you are watching this to find out if you are fully differentiated, I will break the bad news to you now. You're probably not. But don't worry, you're in the same boat as, well, everyone else on the planet, actually. Don't worry about this and keep watching because I'll explain more about differentiation, Murray Bowen, and family systems. Also in this video, I am going to explain how things like playing too much video games is connected with differentiation, and what responses to my annoying therapist-y questions like, and how did that make you feel, are also connected to how differentiated someone is. And I'm talking about responses like this. I know, I feel like it was more of the same, really. And like this. I think we feel that it's probably the right decision. My name is Oliver and I'm a family systems therapist, and my guilty confession to you all is that I had no intention of working with families and relatively little interest in family systems when I first became a therapist. In fact, working with families was actually a result of a series of miscommunications upon getting hired to work in an adolescent treatment center. I got the strong impression that I was being hired to run group therapy sessions in a residential treatment center for teenagers. The clinical director, however, thought I was being hired to work with families. So I was thrown to the wolves on my first day, and I had to start learning how to work with families. I did quite well at first, and I had some good results with the families I was first assigned. But as the family dynamics got more complicated and the symptoms more serious, I realized I needed more of a framework to understand families and individuals within those families. Family systems and Murray Bowen changed everything for me. This is why I'm such a big fan of this work. Today, I use concepts of differentiation in almost every session, and I should tell you that I see a mixture of families, couples, and individual adults. And perhaps half of my clients is individual adults, and I still use this stuff. Differentiation and the interventions I'm going to share with you today are sometimes introduced to my client at the end of the first session. And that is because it is such a containing way to explain symptoms, relationship dynamics, internal dynamics, as well as to set treatment plans and goals. So what is differentiation? Aside from being the process by which you become differentiated, it's actually a bit of a beast to explain. I have found that the easiest way to explain what differentiation is all about is to imagine a fully differentiated person first, and then we work backwards to describe the process of differentiation and how you get there. Before I describe a fully differentiated person, here's the spoiler alert. It's not you, and neither is it me for that matter. And that is because no one ever reaches the status of being fully differentiated, except perhaps Oprah, but that is yet to be scientifically validated by myself or anyone. This is how I imagine a fully differentiated person. And I'm never entirely sure if this looks like a complete hot mess or vaguely interesting, but hopefully it will become clearer in a few minutes. Let me talk you through the characteristics of a fully differentiated person. This person can fully distinguish between their thoughts and their feelings and self and other. And I'm going to explain a lot more about that. As a result of being able to differentiate between thoughts, feelings, self, and other, they have this lovely, solid, healthy boundary around themselves. You can interpret the boundary of self in many different ways, and I will probably change what it means depending on the situation, but bear with me. For now, let's think of it as a solid sense of self. This person knows who they are, they feel stable, they feel secure, they know their values and beliefs. This firm boundary around self means that their values, thoughts, and beliefs don't really waver too much. Now, maybe they change their mind over time, but if they do, it's going to be because they've really thought about it. They're very intentional about these things. They know who they are, they know what they want, they know where they're going. Murray Bowen conceptualizes differentiation as being on a scale of 0 to 100. So let's put this fully differentiated person at the far end of the scale with a score of 100. And then let's compare this to somebody with very low levels of differentiation. And for the sake of simplicity, we can imagine this person being at 0. This is someone who's very undifferentiated. So when you compare the two, you'll notice a lot of differences. Perhaps first of all, you might notice that an undifferentiated person has overlapping thoughts, feelings, self, and other. This person has a lot of difficulty separating out thoughts, feelings, self, and other compared to the differentiated person whose boxes are all separate. The boundary around this person is porous, and again, that means a lot of different things depending on what I'm talking about. But for right now, let's think of it as somebody whose identity, their values, beliefs, direction in life is less solid and less fixed in place. Now, as a result of this, the porous boundary, they are more prone to being influenced by people around them. A really obvious way to find an example is by looking at teenagers, but this is also unfair because teenagers are in the process of life where they're still supposed to be finding their identity and figuring out their values and beliefs, but it might illustrate the point. Think about a teenager that you know who suddenly wants to dye their hair pink. Most teenagers that I've worked with, and I have worked with a lot over my career, will insist that it was their idea to dye their hair pink. But after a while, I usually find out they want to dye their hair pink because Catherine Lucas just did it. And let's face it, Catherine Lucas is really cool. Teens want to fit in. They are developing a sense of identity away from their family, but also in relation to their peers. So teenagers might change their minds or their values or the color of their hair, depending on who and what is around them. Pink hair might be cool because Catherine Lucas got her hair dyed, but next week Christina Carey might be the cool one who got a nose ring, and all of a sudden this teenager's getting things pierced. For teenagers, this is developmentally appropriate. They're going to be influenced by people around them. Now, a less distinct example would be an adult friend who you know, and you're at dinner with them and there's a heated conversation about politics, and this friend doesn't really have much of opinion. You get the sense that they go with the flow. They might say something and then back down. And that is because they haven't really thought through who they are, what they believe in, and where their politics lie. Their sense of self hasn't really been solidified. The goal for most of my clients at some point, although probably not a treatment priority, is to help them figure out this part of their identity. By the end of treatment, I want their boundaries to be nice and solid like this. Murray Bowen talked about this in terms of knowing our values and our guiding principles. And to be honest, when do we ever sit down and figure these things out? It definitely doesn't happen in high schools where I come from, and I'm pretty sure it doesn't happen in high schools in this country. So this aspect of the work that I do is to help people become fully differentiated, become emotionally mature adults with guiding principles and values. There is one final difference between these two images that I want us to bookmark for now, and we'll come back to it. And that is to do with the amount of space inside each of these images. This is a central feature of Bowen family systems and differentiation, and it's very important to talk about. But first of all, let us talk about thoughts and feelings. Now, you might very well think that you have thoughts and feelings and this part of differentiation down, but let me explain what I mean, and you can look for signs of it in other people this week. The next time you ask someone specifically how they feel about something, I guarantee that they will reply with a thought. It's literally only in movies and TVs do I hear people insert an actual feelings word after the words, I feel. In the real world, most people will say, I feel that, or I feel like, and immediately after that or like, they will tell you a thought. For example, when I say, how did it feel when she told you she was going to be late? The answer will be something like, I feel that she's always late. That's not a feeling. I will ask again, yeah, but how did it feel Well, I wasn't surprised. And that's how you don't feel. To be completely transparent with you, I know I do this myself because I was horrified to watch an old video of myself the other week and I said, I feel like, or I feel that. We all do it and we're all a work in progress. Part of my job is to help clients separate out thoughts from feelings. And I'm not embarrassed to use the feelings wheel to do so. For sure, I was the guy who rolled his eyes in grad school at the very mention of a feelings wheel, and it's now actually part of my logo in my private practice. If you don't know how to use a feelings wheel, well, I'm going to tell you. Most of us, no matter how undifferentiated we are, we know if we're mad, sad, or glad. We know the basics of what we're feeling, and those words are in the center of the wheel. So you start there and you can work your way out to find a more nuanced version of what you're feeling. So I fully own that I am that therapist who bugs people to talk about their feelings. And aside from being very annoying when I interrupt clients to give me a feeling or to point out that they gave me a thought, I am actually helping. What I'm doing with all those annoying questions is I'm trying to separate and engage different parts of their brain. And in doing so, I'm separating out thoughts from feelings. And I'm getting them to be hyper aware of what a thought is and what a feeling is. In doing so, I'm helping them differentiate. Now, obviously in a heated exchange or when a client is upset, it's not appropriate to do that. So you have to use your clinical judgment to decide when and how often to do this. But separating out thoughts and feelings, pretty good intervention there. Self and other is a little harder to understand. So bear with me as I try and fumble my way through this. So we have an internalized version of ourself. And for the most part, we know this because we know who we are. We have a chronological sense of ourself that tells a story of ourself over time. It includes how we've changed, how we've grown, what we like, what we believe in. And this all contributes to some version of our identity and our sense of self. Very disturbed people with severe mental illness don't have a stable sense of self. And actually part of therapy with them is to help them integrate and stabilize their sense of self. Now, having a stable sense of self allows us to be in relationship with other people. And that is because we have an internalized representation of people that we are closest to in our lives. And I call that other. So with an internalized sense of self and an internalized sense of other, I can remember who I'm in a relationship with, and I can remember important people in my life. The internalized other that represents my dog helps me remember that he might need dog food when I'm at the grocery store. I can conjure him up and remember what type of dog food he likes. And I imagine my dog has an internalized version of me, which would be an other that lives inside of him, because he seems to remember me when he sees me, appears to be excited when I walk through the door, and generally wants to hang out with me all the time. Just like thoughts and feelings, it's really much more helpful when self and other are separate and balanced. In sessions with families, one of the indicators that someone's self and others are overlapping is when I hear parents say something like this. So I might ask something like, well, how did it feel when she was late? And one of the parents will inevitably say, well, we feel that she's always late. So assuming that I'm going to let the fact that he didn't actually tell me a feelings word there, I will jump on the word choice of we. So if I've got a lot of rapport with this family, I might say, who is we? Or I could say, could you repeat that using an I statement? And if they don't know my reasoning, I'm more than happy to explain. And I'll say, in my experience, family members have a very hard time talking from their own experience and often talk on behalf of other people. I would really like to introduce a rule in our sessions that only one person talks at a time and individuals don't talk on behalf of other people. I'll also add that a lot of people and families find this very hard to do, so you can probably expect me to nudge you if and when you slip up on this. So that is a butchered version of something Salvador Minuchin referred to as his golden rule. He's setting the tone for helping people not be enmeshed. Much like thoughts and feelings, asking people to speak from an I position is a way of helping them separate out self from other. In effect, I'm asking them not to assume that their partner, their son, their daughter, the child has the same feeling as them, because to do so would imply that you know what your family members think without asking them, and that's not very differentiated. Murray Bowen talks a lot about these two opposing forces that live within us. One is the desire to be together, and the other is the desire to be autonomous and free and unique. And these are completely opposing and contrasting, contradictory forces that present quite a problem for, our species, our well-being, and our relationships. It also explains our tendency to mush up or confuse I statements and we statements and self and other. Using I statements or the I position is a pretty solid intervention to get people to begin to separate out self from other. So let's go back to this idea of a scale of differentiation. In his work with families, Dr. Bowen saw that our ability to become differentiated was on this scale, with the ideal fully differentiated person at 100 and an undifferentiated person at 0. Most of us, he thought, were on the lower end of this scale, but with some solid work, we could maybe inch towards a more Oprah-like way of being. I've been thinking about babies a lot recently, probably because I've just met my goddaughter for the first time. Her name's Lana, and she's all of 4 months old. And I was watching her at the dinner table the other night, wondering what the hell her experience was right then. Babies have to be entirely undifferentiated at the start of their lives, if you think about it. A newborn baby has no idea really what thoughts and feelings are. They just react to sensations, sights, and sounds. If we had to draw a diagram for her, I think I would draw the thoughts, feelings, self, and boxes as being really tiny. There's probably not much, if any, differentiation between self and other as a baby, because they are 100% reliant on the other person to keep them alive. And there's one school of thought that actually thinks that when babies are first born, they don't actually see their caregivers as different people. They're just another part of self that is not very good at doing what they demand. As babies get older, their brain starts developing and they have a lot of new thoughts, which they're quite happy to share with you. And they can start identifying feelings like mad, sad, and glad. And as they get more older, their emotional vocabulary increases. So those thoughts and feelings boxes get a little larger as you get older. Now, at the same time, their sense of self becomes more differentiated. And this is a lot of what the terrible twos are all about. The child is starting to work out that they don't have to do what their parent says. And no, actually, I won't be wearing sunblock today. Thank you very much. And so they're playing with their sense of self by saying no to everything because they realize that you're not the boss of me. Teenagers are on a much different part of this journey to differentiation. They're still reliant on caregivers for food and shelter, but they are discovering a sense of self away from who they are in a family towards a sense of self of who they are in relationship to their peers. And I already touched upon how influential others are as they inch up this spectrum towards differentiation and work out their identity. But when we leave home at maybe 18 or 20, Murray Bowen thinks that we've reached the most differentiated we become, and it looks something like this. He believed that the most differentiated we become is around the 50 mark, probably on the lower end of 50, something like this. So there's more bad news. Depending on what is going on in our lives, we can slide up and down the scale. When I describe this to the graduate level students that I teach, I joke that our class would have a very different vibe if my parents were in the room taking notes. And you might be able to relate to this idea because you have a self at work that is quite different from the self that you are when you're at the family dinner table with your siblings over Thanksgiving. Stressful situations such as COVID, getting a new dog, getting married, can shift us up and down the spectrum too. So you might notice that our ability to distinguish thoughts, feelings, self, and other becomes impaired at certain times in our lives. Dr. Bowen thought that the ultimate test of our personal growth in this area is to remain roughly at the same level of differentiation most of the time, but especially when in contact with our family. So earlier in this video, I mentioned there was another difference between a differentiated person and us mere mortals who are undifferentiated. It's actually the most important thing to notice, and it's all of this space in the undifferentiated person. This space gets filled with something that we call chronic anxiety. Now, chronic anxiety is a concept that I think is unique to Bowen family systems. And it's a type of anxiety that is distinguished from acute anxiety, which is usually what we're thinking about when we talk about anxiety. Acute anxiety is that pang in your stomach when you're about to take a test, or when you're watching something scary on TV, or when you're feeling stressed out at work. Chronic anxiety is background anxiety. It's in all of us. We're so used to it being there because it's been there since we were born that we hardly notice it. Now, the important thing to know here is the less differentiated you are, the more anxiety you carry around. This is not exactly good news for us all because we're all less differentiated than we'd like to be. And it means that we are carrying around a lot of chronic anxiety. When I explain this to clients, I want to make a big deal about this being one of the reasons that I'm picking apart their thoughts and feelings and making them use I statements and all of that. Because the less differentiated you are, the more chronic anxiety you have. Conversely, the more you work on yourself to be differentiate, to separate out thoughts, feelings, self and other, the less chronic anxiety you have, the less space you have inside of you to be filled with chronic anxiety. If I can explain this to a client at the beginning of treatment, it sets me up with a bit of a treatment plan and a goal to differentiate thoughts, feelings, self and other, and to lower chronic anxiety, because the more I can separate out thoughts, feelings, self and other, the less space there is inside to be filled with chronic anxiety. I find that most often it really helps client connect to the work. It helps them understand what we're doing and motivates them to engage in the therapeutic process. So let's talk chronic anxiety. You might be thinking, well, if I can't feel chronic anxiety and it's just there in the background, what's the big deal? Well, this might actually have to be a whole other video, unfortunately, but let me tell you a few things about chronic anxiety so that you hit subscribe and come back for more. I'm devious like that. Because we are undifferentiated and we have these porous boundaries around ourselves, it means chronic anxiety can spread from one person to another, especially if you're in a relationship with that person. So that means if you live with your significant other or you're in a long-term relationship, you're not just carrying around your own chronic anxiety, you are also getting flooded with their chronic anxiety just to mess with you. And it's all to do with this lack of solidity in your boundaries. There's been a lot of studies about the ways that we react when we have too much chronic anxiety. And react is the key word there as opposed to respond. Because if you have too much of this chronic anxiety, you are going to be more reactive than responsive. When there's too much chronic anxiety in an individual, we're going to react in one of four ways. I call these our automatic reactive behaviors because most of the time we're on autopilot. We don't even know we're doing this. Number one, I call attack and defend. It's when we're cranky. When we're filled with too much chronic anxiety, we're more likely to be a little snippy or to be cranky or defensive. Number two is all about withdrawing, psychologically tuning out, maybe into YouTube, maybe into Netflix, maybe video games. When we're too stressed out, we take a mental health break by escaping. And I think in teenagers, this explains a lot of video games. When things are too stressful at work or home, we escape into video games. Number three is about retreating. That's physically leaving stressful situations. So it could mean running away, walking away from a fight, or it could also mean staying later at work. So when things are stressful at home, I might suddenly stay longer at work. I might decide to take a weekend trip with my friends or suddenly take up golf. The final one is emotional meltdowns. These are the big mood swings and outbursts we see often in teenagers. I think some of that can be attributed to chronic anxiety, but also think about the times when you got overwhelmed or flooded with feelings and see if that is not linked to chronic anxiety. So I've given you lots of good reasons why we need to understand differentiation, and I hope it begins to help explain what differentiation is and why we need to understand it and how to deal with it. Stay tuned for more and hit follow and subscribe.